Good morning. See some guests with us today. We appreciate you coming our way. We're going to begin a quick quarter survey of the New Testament today. We went through the Old Testament quickly, and we're going to be starting the New Testament. In fact, the lesson we're covering today, we don't talk about very much. When I go to the last book of my Old Testament, you know what the next page is? It's blank. Look at that. That's blank. You know what this page represents? 450 years. Isn't that something? A lot can happen in a summer. We're about to start summer. It's going to be crazy and busy. So I guess I'm going to ask you to turn in your Bibles to the blank page between the Old and New Testaments. No, we won't do that way. We need to talk about this period because as we go into the New Testament, there are dynamics in play that occur in the between the Testaments period. So between the Old and New Testaments, they certainly didn't call it that, but that's what we're going to call it. So between Malachi and Matthew are a period of about 450 years, and sometimes this period is referred to as the silent years. Why? Why is it called the silent years? Okay. Divine revelation pauses. Now, we've been using this book, the big picture, as our guide, and I also produced some written material for the Old Testament. I didn't for the New. We're going to use this. However, there's nothing on the silent years in this book. It's in another one that I've done recently on the life of Jesus. But so you're just going to have to rely on me a little bit. It's like when Larry leads that song, "My Eyes Have Seen Your Glory." Sorry, it's not in your books. You're just going to have to look on the screen. Sorry, it's not in your books. It's not even in your Bible. Isn't that something? During this period of time, 450 years, there's a lot that happens. The world didn't just stop spinning and say, all right, that's it. No revelation from God. No, it kept right on going. And by the time you come to the New Testament, and that's why we're talking about this, how it relates to the New Testament. When you come to the pages of the New Testament, all of a sudden you've got different groups and concepts and feasts that you don't read about in the Old Testament. And I've listed just a few of these. We are so familiar with the Pharisees, aren't we? Where are the Pharisees mentioned in the Old Testament? They're not. They're not there. But Jesus doesn't say, okay, Pharisees. Okay, yeah, all right. He just accepts them. They're already there. Of course, he condemns them for their hypocrisy, doesn't he? And the same thing can be said for the Sadducees. There's another religious sect. These are people who are teaching the folks, the people in Judea, and they become well respected as the leaders, as the experts. And so you've got the Pharisees, the Sadducees. Do these two groups get along? No, they don't. They are working together in an effort to destroy Jesus. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they unite together in that. There is another group, a religious sect that is not in the Bible at all, but we know about them because they're the ones who squirreled away the Dead Sea Scrolls, as we call them. Starts with an E. Do you remember the name of that group? We don't talk about them. The Essenes. The Essenes. And each of these groups felt like they were leading God's people. They were the ones who were the true Israel. What about this third item I've got up here, Hanukkah? Where do you read about Hanukkah in the Old Testament? Doesn't exist. This is a religious festival of the Jews, and it's sometimes referred to as the Festival of Lights Do you see it in the New Testament? The answer is yes, you do. This is not a divine feast, but it commemorates when the Maccabean revolt threw out the Syrians from the temple. That's not in the Bible, but is it?
That. Could you try again?
No, I can't. She just talked to me there. All right. Herod the Great. Are Herods mentioned in the Old Testament? You get the point here. The Herods are everywhere in the Gospels, in the book of Acts. They're nowhere in the Old Testament, and that's why we're even considering this. The world empire Rome. We're going to talk about them in just a moment. And here's something really important: synagogues. Synagogues are everywhere, not just in the Gospels, but also in the book of Acts. They play an extremely important role in the Jewish communities. What do they do on Saturday in the synagogues? They worshiped. They read from the law. And Jesus famously did that in Luke 4. He went into a synagogue. He opened a scroll and read from it, read from Isaiah, and said, let me tell you, what I just read for you here in the synagogue, it's being fulfilled right now. It was right after Jesus' baptism and then the temptation, and then he goes into the synagogue in Nazareth and tells them, I'm the anointed one. I'm the Messiah. And what do they do in response? They tried to kill him, his own people. All right, we do have a hint to this period of silent years, though. There is kind of a reference to it. Here's the famous verse from Amos 8, near the end of the book. Amos 8, he says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord God, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread, nor thirst of water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. Why do you think God stopped divine revelation during this period between the Testaments? And it wasn't just a few years or 100 years, over 4 centuries. Why? Say that again? Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about, oops, that's not next. I don't have it on the screen. We'll talk about it later then. I forgot. Malachi is going to give us a hint to that. And it's about the people needing to change, needing to have time to cool off, to repent, and to get ready for the coming of the Messiah. Is that how you would put that, or do you want to add to that? Okay, their worship had become rote. All right, maybe we need to heed that ourselves. Sometimes our worship can get very rote. Well, what is interesting, and this is another verse you're familiar with, Galatians 4, verse 4, is that God, during the silent years, this intertestamental period, as it's sometimes called, God was still very much involved in the affairs of the world, wasn't he? For one thing, Paul says in Galatians 4, verse 4, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman. What does that suggest to you? The fullness of time. Does that just simply mean on a calendar, God was waiting and says, okay, now's the time? Or is there more to it?
It was God's purpose to determine things his way and on his time, not mine.
Okay. So God has a plan and he's doing it on his time. Think about the world empire at the time Jesus is born. It's Rome. A couple of things about that. You've heard of the Pax Romana? The Pax Romana? What does that mean? Any Latin scholars here? Roman peace. Define peace. How did the Romans define peace? No wars. Why are there no wars? Because you conquered everybody, and everybody's terrified of you. You've heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome. When we say that, what do we mean by that? There's always different ways to get there, but you can always get there, something like that. Okay. It's like an octopus who has his tentacles in everything. That's exactly right. If there's an insurrection, what's going to happen is Rome is going to send its troops, and they're going to send them very quickly because they have roads, paved roads or stone roads. They had developed cement during this time as well. And the point is, if you rebel against Rome, in a matter of a very short period, there are going to be Roman soldiers knocking on your door. And that helped deter that. However, who else used the Roman roads? Everyone else did, including Jesus. Who else? The Apostle Paul. Now they've got an easy way to reach out. When Jesus, during his ministry, we don't talk about this a lot, but this is really important. When Jesus, during his earthly ministry, preaching, he centered himself in a couple of places, including Capernaum in Galilee. Why Capernaum? Because it was part of this trade route, this hub, where you've got people who would come to Capernaum to trade. They'd hear about this miracle worker, and then they'd go back home and just tell people about this. Hey, there's something going on in Galilee and Judea, and some really interesting things. And by the time, just 3 years later, by the time the apostles now are ready to preach the gospel, people have already heard about Jesus. Now they're going to learn more about him. It's almost as if Jesus did that on purpose. He picked these places where there would be a hub of travel and activity. It's almost as if God did this on purpose. In the fullness of time, he sent forth his son. This was his plan. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I forgot to mention that. That's right. A common language. Now, the Romans, what did they typically speak? Latin. But what was the lingua franca of the first century Mediterranean world? Greek. People were bilingual. People were trilingual. How about here in America? Unolingual. Barely that. I speak English and that's it. A lot of you, though, know English and Spanish. Some of you might know some other languages, but this was typical in the first century world. People spoke Greek, and that would be basically equivalent to the lingua franca, if I'm saying that even that right, of today. What is the world's language today? It's English. Maybe one day that'll change. But right now, you go to a lot of foreign countries, and I remember taking Spanish class when I was in high school, and we were learning some phrases, and the Spanish teacher went around the room and said, all right, so you're on a street corner. What do you say to somebody? And some of them would say, buenos dias, and then someone else would say something else. And my response was, I would say in English, do you speak English? And the teacher didn't like that very much. I want to teach you a song. And you're saying to yourself, Mark, we're adults. Just like we played Bible Jeopardy, we played a little game last week and we loved it. It's so much fun. Kids love games. Well, so do we adults. This is a great way to learn. And this is the song. Daniel prophesied about 4 kingdoms to come: Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman. Why do I want to teach that to you? So that you'll remember these names. Daniel prophesied about 4 kingdoms to come: Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman. Daniel prophesied. Is that in the Bible? Daniel prophesied about the intertestamental period. He actually talked about Babylon and Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. All right, let's talk about these briefly. Again, this is a survey. We're not here to get too detailed. When the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, who deported them? Who demolished them? The southern kingdom of Judah. Babylon. Babylon. The northern kingdom had previously, a century before, been taken by the Assyrians in 722. And that's part of the biblical history. The Babylonian period and a little bit of the Persian period are part of the Old Testament as well. So I didn't mean to ask a trick question there. What were the 3 deportations to Babylon? I said these are important. We need to remember them. And I'll remind you, 605, 597, 586. What happened in 586 BC? What did Nebuchadnezzar do in Jerusalem? He destroyed the city and the temple, demolished the temple. While Jews had been deported to Babylon, they're in Babylon and saying, well, God's going to send us back home. We know that because we've got the temple. God will never allow his temple to be destroyed. But what had God been saying through the prophet Jeremiah? Don't rely on the temple. Don't say, oh, we have the temple. God's left the temple, or he's going to leave the temple. His glory will leave the temple. So Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, he is the dominant world empire. He's deporting people from their homeland, invading. And then in 539, they are defeated by Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia. And in 538 BC, what happens? What does Cyrus begin? He allows numerous nations who had been deported by Babylon, he allows them to go back home, including Judah. He even gives them money out of the treasury to help them rebuild the cities, rebuild their temples. Why did Cyrus do this? Nebuchadnezzar deported people, so did Assyria, but Cyrus allowed people to go back home and finance their return. What is it that he wants? Tax base. That's exactly right. And is it a little more benevolent, a little nicer? See, it's not Nebuchadnezzar the Great, it's Cyrus the Great. That's what we call him. What did you say? Okay, tax base, money, but also a sense of loyalty. Now, is Cyrus the Great mentioned in the Old Testament? Yes, he's mentioned by Isaiah by name, to the point that people who study Isaiah see his name appear and how he is going to allow the people to return. They say this must have been written after the fact. And they insist that Isaiah 40 through 66 particularly had to have been written after the fact. Because what's the alternative? He was inspired by God. He wrote by inspiration. What about the book of Daniel? Daniel talks a lot about the Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman empires. I mean, it's prophecy, it's general, but he makes some pretty specific statements about it. What do scholars today say about Daniel? It had to have been written after the fact. What did Jesus think about the book of Daniel? It was inspired. He quoted from it, referred to himself as the Son of Man, in keeping with Daniel 2. All right. So the Babylonians were sacked by the Persians. The Persians were defeated by whom? Who comes on the scene? Alexander the Great. No, Cyrus the Great, he's long gone. I mean, look at that time period, 539 to 332. That's the height of Persian power. And what did the Persians want to do? If you know your world history, this is not Bible history. We're outside of the Bible now. By the way, Esther, she was the queen of Persia, lived in Susa, in the capital. Totally different set of kings. They're all related to Darius and these other fellas. But you've got the Persian Empire. In 333 BC, 333, there's this battle at Issus, I-S-S-U-S. What you had is the Greeks wanting to defend their homeland, and the Persians are invading from the east, and you've got the famous Battle of Marathon. You've got a lot of what seems to me, when I look at world history, I'm not a historical scholar by any means, but I look at that and I wonder if God's providence isn't playing a part. As Persia is advancing toward the West, we cling to our Western values. We would have had a very different world if the Greeks, if Alexander the Great specifically had not stood up to the Persians, to Darius. This is a mosaic. My understanding is it's being restored, but there's Alexander the Great. He's just a small little piece in that large mosaic that's portrayed. I'm sure you've seen this image of him before. Here is, and I know you can't see much detail here, but here is a map of the Greek Empire. Now, the pink over here in the corner, well, can't really see that very well, can you? Over here, this is Greece. And what Alexander the Great did is respond to the Persian Empire, and he ended up conquering Persia, even went down into Africa. So I'm not here to give you a world history lesson, just to point out to you that this was an incredible warrior. Anybody done some special study on Alexander the Great? It'd be a good lesson for somebody to do and write a report on. Yes, sir. Several different affairs? What do you mean? Okay, yeah. The battle at Issus, if I'm saying that right, in 333 BC, Alexander the Great was 25 years old. When did he die? Less than 10 years later. He was in his 30s. Isn't that amazing? And he conquered the world. And I wonder, there is no divine commentary whatsoever on Alexander the Great. But I wonder if God had a hand in his victories through his providence. He is talked about in the book of Daniel, like I said. And by the way, here is the area we're most concerned about, Judea. Small little part. Notice though, you've got the purple down here. This is Egypt. This is where Egypt is, and then up here you got the green. The green people and the purple people don't like each other, and they fight with each other. Who's caught in the middle? Israel, or Judea as it's called at this time. In Egypt, you have the Ptolemies, and in the green area, Syria and beyond, you have the Syrians. And that's important because it affects our intertestamental period. It affects God's covenant people here. And that's what we're going to talk about. You have a constant fighting between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. I said that wrong, didn't I? Who was Ptolemy and who was Seleucids? When Alexander the Great died, suddenly, he had all this power accumulated. And what happened? He had 4 generals. The ones that we talk about are Seleucus and Ptolemy, and their descendants become the rulers of the Ptolemaic Empire that took Egypt. The kingdom was divided up. Daniel prophesied about this. And then the Syrians, and I don't want to get too far afield of what we're trying to look at here, and that is the Jews, how it relates to the Jews. But realize they are caught in the middle. There is constant fighting between Egypt and Syria. These 2 armies, just unbelievable. When you come down to reading about this, what are our primary sources for this period of time between the Testaments? It's not the Bible. I got a blank page. What is it? I'll just tell you. One of the great sources we have is 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Is this inspired literature? 1st and 2nd Maccabees. It's historical, and therefore it's useful for that purpose. It is not inspired, but it is part of the Apocrypha. And there are some Bibles that contain them. And most of the translations are going to be the New Revised Standard. A lot of the translations don't translate these. Another great source we have for information during this time period is Josephus. Josephus was a general for Judea, and he lost in the Jewish war against Rome. And we all talk about AD 70 when the temple, the Herodian temple is destroyed and never rebuilt. But these are our sources of information. And I'm going to quote from First Maccabees here in just a moment. Right now, I'll go and put it on the screen right now. In 167 BC, I mean, we still got a century and a half to get to Jesus. You have this ruler who is a Seleucid descendant, and his name is Antiochus Epiphanes. And Epiphanes sounds like an epiphany. What he's saying is, I am the glorious one. I'm special. I am not just Antiochus or Antiochus. I am Antiochus Epiphanes. And he thought he was really special. And what he wanted to do was come not just in Judea, but all of the province ruled by the Seleucids. He wanted them to become Greeks. He wanted to Hellenize the world and bring their Western values. And what that means is they're going to have to start worshiping, they're going to have to stop worshiping their God, and they're going to have to start worshiping the God of gods in Greek mythology. And who is that? Zeus. And what they do, what Antiochus does, is go into the temple and desecrate the temple by offering a pig. Would that be okay to offer a pig on God's altar? That was blasphemy. And there was a priest who stood up against this. The Syrians erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. This is 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 54. Sound like a Bible citation, doesn't it? They also built altars in the surrounding towns of Judah. They go into the temple, and there's a priest. There are different people in the kingdom of Syria who were sent to all these different places. And one of them just happened to be sent to where he was. Nain is where Mattathias was. Mattathias. And they said, all right, priest, who wants to offer a sacrifice? Who wants to offer a pig? And when a young priest came forward, Mattathias killed him. And this started the Maccabean revolt. And so what he cries out as they are revolting, he says, let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me. This is a rebellion. This is a rebellion that begins. And how do you think Antiochus Epiphanes felt about all this? Well, he's mad. He's upset. And I've read different accounts of this. I don't think Antiochus had it out for the Jews. I don't think he was saying, I hate those Jews and I'm going to go desecrate their worship. He thought we all should be united. He wanted to unite his kingdom, and he wanted them to all have the one loyalty to Zeus. And he thought this would just be great. And Jewish culture faced a culture shock when you had Greek culture coming in. And a lot of the young people, a lot of the young Jewish men in particular, they really liked Jewish culture. Does that sound familiar? How our culture can infiltrate us and degrade our values? And that is nothing new by any means. I'll just put the rest of these up here. They do take back the temple. The Maccabean revolt, it grows. He has 4 sons. You remember the 4 sons of Mattathias, the part of this Maccabean revolt. I don't want to go into a lot of detail about it right now. For one thing, I don't know a lot of the details. But they eventually rededicate the temple in 164 BC and establish a feast commemorating it. And it is called Hanukkah. It's also called the Feast of Lights. It's also called the Feast of Dedication. What are they dedicating? The altar. They're rededicating the altar. This is not commanded in the Mosaic Law, but this becomes part of the Jewish culture. When did the Jews stop observing Hanukkah? They haven't. And it's in December every year. And they have Hanukkah. And that's where this comes from. Eventually, Judea is restored. They get rid of Syrian control, and the Jews control Judea. The grandson of Mattathias The grandson of Mattathias is Aristobulus, and he was a priest. And so they have a succession of priests for about 30 years. But then Aristobulus says, you know what? I don't want to just be a priest. What else does he want to be? A king. For the first time since Jeconiah, there is now a king sitting on the throne in Judea. Isn't that something? However, infighting among the family eventually comes to a head in 37 BC. And by that time, Rome is the dominant world power. They are brought in and they say, the end to the monarchy. Your experiment is over. And we are going to begin to appoint a king. And the person that they appointed was Herod the Great. He wasn't called the Great then, though. He is the king. Mark Antony. We all know who Mark Antony was, right? Mark Antony and Herod were buds. Did you know that? They were friends. And Herod endeared himself to Mark Antony because he studied in Rome with them. That he got to know him as a young man. And Herod also ingratiated himself to the first emperor of Rome. It wasn't Julius Caesar. The first declared emperor of Rome was his, I guess, nephew. What'd you say? Yeah, so we've got this new emperor sitting on the throne, and he reigns a long, long time, and he's very gracious. But when there was a revolt against him, the people who would kill Julius Caesar, make a long story short, Herod helped the new emperor before he became the emperor, or as he was trying to steal the throne. So we're getting into Roman history, and I'm getting into things that I'm more comfortable talking about some of this. Why are we talking about this intertestamental period? Why are we talking about these guys?
Help us understand where Jesus was and all of this after the Son of the Spirit.
All right, this helps us understand where Jesus is coming from and where these people come from. Who are the Pharisees? Well, Jesus condemns the Pharisees. Remember this verse. We're going to talk about the Sermon on the Mount a little bit this morning, and this is from the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." When you go from the Old Testament to the New Testament, there is no mention of Pharisees, but Jesus accepts them as the religious leaders and the scribes as well. These are the lawyers, the experts in the law. Matthew 12, verse 9, Jesus goes into a synagogue. He goes into a synagogue a lot throughout childhood and throughout his ministry. He'll go into a synagogue. Whenever Paul traveled on his missionary journeys, the first place he would go to preach the gospel was always a synagogue. If there wasn't a synagogue, like in the case with Philippi, where did he go? To the riverside, and he found Lydia and baptized her. There was no synagogue. Synagogues were everywhere. There's no temple anymore. The people still need to meet, and they meet in the synagogues. When Saturday came around, no work was done in keeping with the Mosaic law, and everybody meets at the synagogue to worship. But Sunday through Friday, these synagogues were community centers. They were for the community. In fact, when Jesus called Levi, we know him better as Matthew, the tax collector, where did he find him? At a tax booth in a synagogue. That's where he found him. They worked in the synagogues during the week. All right, synagogues are well established. We have archaeological evidence of them. They exist. Here's a nice artist rendering of a synagogue, and they kind of follow a basic model. Where does it say in the Old Testament, "Thou shalt build a synagogue"? It's not there. This was a response to the people being dispersed throughout the Babylonian Empire and not having a temple. There's no longer a temple, and these synagogues appeared. Synagogue just means an assembly, people coming together to assemble. Is there kind of a New Testament equivalent to the Jewish synagogue? Yeah, so what is that? Church buildings. where people come together. In synagogues, you would have a group of elders. Of course, this is true of throughout Israelite history. You had elders. This pattern is used by God for local churches. It's kind of interesting. It's not an exact parallel. I'm not suggesting that it is. When Jesus, as part of his trial, stood before Caiaphas, Caiaphas was a Sadducee. Caiaphas was an evil man. He is serving as high priest. And yet here he is accusing the actual high priest, Jesus, of heinous crimes. The crime of what? What did Jesus claim to be? The Son of God. And Caiaphas said, "We have heard it ourselves. This is blasphemy." The problem was, it was true. Jesus was the Son of God. Annas also. Annas and Caiaphas. How long was a priest supposed to serve? Well, a high priest, excuse me. How long was a high priest supposed to serve? For life. The Roman Empire put an end to that because they didn't want one man to have total, complete power for such a dominant period of time. Annas got around that. Annas, the high priest, he was kicked out of being the high priest, so he made sure that his sons became priests, and Caiaphas was his son-in-law. So Annas was still very, very powerful, but Caiaphas, his son-in-law, was the actual legal high priest during the days of Jesus, recognized by Rome. We had the Herods. The Herods ruled, and Herod the Great, when he died, he divided up his kingdom. And Archelaus was the king that we read about in Matthew chapter 2. Archelaus became ruler in place of his father in Judea. And what did Joseph do? He stayed away. He was still in Egypt. He had fled to Egypt because Herod the Great was trying to kill Jesus. He stayed until Archelaus was deposed. And when Archelaus, the son of Herod the Great, was deposed, he was no longer serving as king. What did Rome establish in Judea as the ruler? The governorship, the prefect, technically. And who is the prefect? Who is the governor of Judea when Jesus comes on the scene? It's not a king, because Rome had said, no, we're not doing this king thing anymore. But they needed somebody who would be loyal to Rome, who could control the kingdom. And Pilate didn't do very well. And he just happened to be the governor when Jesus was standing trial. And Jesus was accused of insurrection. I'm picking some passages out of Matthew here. We could have gone anywhere. But there was, so when Jesus stood before Caiaphas, before the Sanhedrin council, something else that pops up, these 70 elders of the people, the Sanhedrin council, when Jesus stands before the council, what do they accuse him of? What is the crime they say Jesus committed? Blasphemy. When they take Jesus then to stand before Pilate, what is the charge? Insurrection. Because blasphemy wouldn't have meant anything to Pilate. He wouldn't have cared. But he does care about this. Why? He is claiming to be a king. Why was that such a big deal? Exactly. The emperor of Rome is not going to be very happy with Pilate allowing somebody to run around saying, "I'm king." And so Pilate has to do something about this. And what he does is kill Jesus. And the rest is history, as we say. And I want to throw this up there as well. We'll leave Matthew. But in the Gospel of John, Jesus doesn't say, "All right, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and tell everybody this isn't a religious feast that you're supposed to be practicing." He doesn't say in John 10, "Stop Hanukkah, don't do it." And by the way, the word Hanukkah means dedication. This is the feast of dedication. When Jesus goes to Jerusalem, he's there in John 10, verse 22. At that time, the feast of dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter. It was December. Jesus was walking in the temple. And what does Jesus do as part of that? He makes a declaration, and he says, "I and my Father are one." And so he's where a lot of people are, where they're able to see him. I'm looking right at it. I'm not finding exactly what I'm looking for. Oh, and I know why. Well, I'm not going to talk about that for right now. Jesus used the Feast of Dedication as an opportunity to present himself, because a lot of people were in Jerusalem, and that's where he told the Pharisees, the Jews, as they're called in John's Gospel, in John 10, verse 30, I and the Father are one. So Jesus had to leave Judea for a period of time. All right. What we have done this morning is walk through the intertestamental period. And I hope it whets your appetite. I hope it makes you go, there's a lot of great, fun, exciting history here that is not recorded in the Bible, and yet it helps us understand the Bible. And that's what I hope to have accomplished this morning. What are we as Christians? We are New Testament Christians, we say. Does that mean we should ignore the Old Testament? Why not? We went through a survey of the Old Testament. Why? Okay. Everything that's in the Old Testament is pointing to Jesus. It's pointing to the church. And that's why we need to spend time looking at the Old Testament. But why have we taken a lesson this morning and walked through intertestamental history? Because of the same thing. And if we, probably the most appropriate time to do that, if we didn't just dedicate a period of study on the intertestamental period, would be Daniel, when we study Daniel. Because he talks in prophecy about these various nations. Yes, ma'am? Life lessons, absolutely. You going to say anything else? No. Okay.
There's a lot of life lessons in
Of course.
that we can learn from, and we can,
History repeats itself. Well, the last passage I want to look at with you this morning, we haven't looked at many passages, have we? Is Malachi 4, verses 5 and 6. Malachi 4, 5 and 6. All right, I'm going to skip that right there. We want to look at the silent years for a moment. Here is Malachi 4, verse 5. Behold, I will send you, God says, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. Elijah the prophet. If this is around 400 BC, how long has it been since Elijah died? It's been about 3 centuries. It's been a long time. How can Elijah be sent? Is he going to be resurrected? But that's what the text says. I'm going to send Elijah. Verse 6, he, Elijah, will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. And then that's it. That's the end. Then I turn the page and it's blank. For hundreds of years, what were God's people waiting for, anticipating? The Messiah. But before the Messiah comes, who has to come? They were waiting for Elijah. My understanding is this tradition still exists for those who deny Jesus is the Messiah. But during this period of time, what the Jewish people would do is every meal, they would have an extra seat, just in case Elijah came knocking on the door and said, hey, can I join you for dinner? And especially during the feasts, they did this. Jesus explains to us, John the Baptist has come and gone. And who was he referring to? Did I say John the Baptist? Elijah has come and gone. And who is he referring to? He was referring to John the Baptist. And next week, we're actually going to talk about John the Baptist just a little bit and how he anticipated Jesus' return. So that's a segue between this first lesson on the intertestamental period and our next lesson, which is in the big picture. The page numbers, there's a chart out in the foyer. Thank you for walking through this with me. I hope you found this helpful.